Alright, so we are getting close to Hugo releasing in Zenless Zone Zero, and I know he is a pretty fan favorite character, so it is exciting to see him finally coming out as a playable character. So today we're going to go over his full kit as well as his signature W engine to see whether or not he will be a good character for you to pull for on your account. So let's start out with his kit here. So Hugo is an ice attack agent, and he does have some pretty interesting stuff in his gameplay. So starting out here with his basic attack, he does actually have two different basic attacks here. The first one is the Dark Abyss Quartet. It's a 4-hit attack where the last hit is a shot attack, which it's important to note that for some stuff later in this kit. But during the 4th hit of his Dark Abyss Quartet, you can actually hold down the button to charge the shot as well. And not only that, to activate his second basic attack, which is the Dark Abyss Concerto, you activate this by holding the attack button after either the 4th hit of his regular basic attack, after a dodge counter, or after a quick assist. And all of those are also considered as basic attack damage as well, so you will be able to buff those by leveling the basic attack skill. And with the Dark Abyss Concerto, it does a physical follow-up with his scythe into another shot attack, and similarly as the Dark Abyss Quartet, you can hold down during this attack to charge up the shot for some extra damage. Then his special attack just deals damage. It doesn't really have any mechanic side behind it. You're really gonna want to use his EX special, which at base, it is just a higher damaging move that can also be followed up into the Dark Abyss Concerto. But once we get to his core passive, you're going to see that his EX special, as well as a few other moves, have a lot of value on them. Now we kind of just quickly glance over his chain attack because it is just a basic kind of attack, and it also does have a charge shot on it as well. It is one of those attacks where he shoots from the back of his scythe, so that is one to keep in mind. Then for the ultimate kind of similar to the EX special, where it's going to deal a lot of damage, and you could follow it up into the Dark Abyss Concerto. Now, let's get into the massive core passive that Hugo has, because he has a lot of mechanics in here, and these are probably the most important for his kit. So, first of all, let's talk about his Dark Abyss Reverb state. He gets this state for 6 seconds anytime he uses his chain attack or hitting an enemy that is stunned. And during this state, he's going to get 12% crit rate and 25% crit damage, which is really good to not only get some extra damage, but also get a bit more consistency since you are boosting up his crit rate. Also, whenever you have either 1 or 2 stun characters on your team, you're going to get an attack buff. With 1 stun character, it's going to be a permanent 300 attack, and if you have 2 stun characters on the team, it's going to be 900 attack. So you could definitely see some team comps where you're going to be running Hugo with 2 stunners, which will probably end up being Lighter and Lycon for his best kind of double stunner team. So you do also get some extra damage there. But by far the most important part of Hugo's kit and his core passive here as well is going to be the Totalize effect. This effect activates whenever Hugo hits an enemy that is stunned using his EX special or his ultimate. When you activate Totalize, it's gonna increase the current attack's damage multiplier by 1000%, which is going to be a pretty insane multiplier boost by itself. But it will also further increase the multiplier based on the remaining stun duration. And this is really good because you do want to get this off as quickly as possible when the enemy is stunned, and the more stun duration that is left, the more extra damage multiplier you're going to get. So these should be some pretty heavy hits that you'll be able to get, assuming that you are using either an EX skill or ultimate upon getting an enemy stunned, or as quickly as possible after you stun an enemy. And when you do trigger Totalize, the enemy stun state will actually end right there. So it's not like other characters where it's just you're able to get a lot of damage, and because the enemy is stunned and they can't move, you basically do all of that damage you would do with other characters just in one fell swoop with the Totalize effect, and then the enemy is going to get out of that stun state. But the good side of this is that based on how much stun duration was left when you activated Totalize, the enemy is going to start out with a smaller amount of days. So you're not starting out from 0 days, you'll start out with a higher amount, which this could be a max of 25 days. So if you do have a stunned enemy and you get Totalize on them very quickly, they'll already have a 1/4 of that days meter. So that is also going to be very good. Now, if you do end up using his EX special on an enemy that is not stunned, it's still fine because you are actually going to deal 20% extra days with that as well. So Hugo does get a lot of value out of his EX special and ultimate with this totalize, because that's going to be his biggest source of damage in his kit. And now for the last part of his core kit, it's going to be his additional ability. Now, the condition to activate this is going to have an ally on the team who is either a stun character or an ice character. So he's going to work very well with pretty much any kind of stunner, as well as any ice character. So Kaku could also be a good support for him if you want to run one stunner, one support, which are also all viable team comps for him. So with his additional ability up, he's going to be able to get 15% extra damage on his chain attack, and this is actually increased by an extra 35% damage if you're hitting the chain attack on normal enemies. So not your elites, not your bosses, just basic enemies. So this could be really good for clearing the first wave in Shiyu defense, which I think is pretty valuable. Then also, whenever you trigger Totalize, he's going to get a 40% damage boost on that, which is pretty crazy considering how much the damage multiplier increases for Totalize already. So getting extra damage there is even better. And also, whenever you use his EX special to trigger Totalize on a normal enemy, he's going to get back 20 energy. And this can only activate once per 30 seconds, which is honestly fine, because normal enemies, you should be hitting a lot of them all at once anyway. So you probably won't use this as much, but getting the extra energy is nice to make sure you have your EX special lined up for when you're going to activate Totalize during a stun window. So that's everything for the main kit there, so let's move on into his Mindscapes now. For his M1, anytime you trigger Totalize during his Dark Abyss reverb state through his core passive, you're going to get additional buffs for that current skill. So you're going to get an extra 12% crit rate, putting it at a total of 24% extra with the Dark Abyss reverb state, as well as an extra 30% crit damage, which puts that total buff at 55% crit damage. So with M1, you are getting a pretty nice damage boost as well as some extra consistency for when you're using the EX special or ultimate that triggers Totalize, so you can have that damage be even higher. Next up, his M2 allows him to not actually end the enemy's stun state whenever you trigger Totalize with the ultimate. And you're also able to ignore 15% of the enemy's defense when you trigger Totalize on them now. And this is really good because not only are you still going to be able to benefit from the enemy being stunned the whole time while still getting that crazy damage, but ignoring enemy defense here is going to allow your damage to go up a pretty noticeable amount, since you probably will have enough support and buffs on him already. So getting enemy defense ignore is going to be really good for his damage. Next up, his M4 allows him to ignore 12% of the target's ice res for 15 seconds whenever he hits them with one of the charge shots. And that's the whole reason I was talking about the shot attacks before, because if you are a heavier spender and you're going to get Mindscapes for Hugo, your M4 is focused on all of those charge shot attacks. So any of those attacks you can do the charge shot for, you're going to be able to get extra damage off of those hits as well with the M4, which is a nice little buff. I wouldn't say as valuable as M1 and M2, but could still be nice if you are using Hugo a lot more on field. Then his last Mindscape here, M6, all the shots that he does in his kit will trigger the Dark Abyss reverb state as well to give him those extra crit rate and crit damage buffs. And now when Totalize is triggered, he also gets an additional 60% damage on that. So once again, a further increase on Totalize. And the last part of his M6 here, when you hit the final hit of the EX special on an enemy that is not currently stunned, you're going to trigger the Totalize effect with a fixed 1000% damage multiplier increase. So with that, you're able to get that Totalize damage on even enemies that aren't stunned, which just gives you way more damage. Obviously it's an M6, so it is going to be a little crazy, but if you are someone who does go for M6s or wants to go M6 for Hugo because you really like him, you do get a pretty nice damage increase with that. So that is nice for people who do go for that. So now, before I talk about his overall value, I do want to touch on what his signature W engine is, because I do feel like a lot of people do like to look at signature W engines, and I've honestly noticed myself pulling for more W engines in Zenless than I have in other Hoyo games like Honkai Star Rail for their light cones. So I think it is important to look at the W engine here when we're talking about whether or not you should pull a character. So for Hugo's W engine, it gives him a 45% crit damage unconditionally, and whenever you use his EX special, chain attack, or ultimate, you're going to gain the absolute zero death sentence effect for 3 seconds. With this absolute zero death sentence, you're going to be able to ignore 25% of the enemy's defense on hit. And what this means for Hugo specifically is that because it activates with EX Special and Ultimate, that means you're going to be able to activate this defense ignore on any time you activate Totalize, because Totalize will activate also with the EX Special or Ultimate, meaning that you're going to have some pretty crazy damage from Hugo there. And also since it activates from the chain attack as well, you can chain attack into Hugo and then also activate Totalize to still take advantage of this absolute zero death sentence, which is really good. You're going to see some pretty crazy damage bonuses from him for that. So now that we talked about his kit and his W engine, let's talk about his overall value and whether or not I think he's going to be a good fit for your account. So overall, I think Hugo is going to be a pretty solid DPS and honestly a bit unique when it comes to an attack character, since he does seem relatively bursty, and he does trade stun duration for some extra damage as well. And with the extra days he gets by using EX Special on a non-stunned character or non-stunned enemy, you're going to be able to run him a little bit on field if you want to, depending on what stun units are good with him at the time. Now, I do think he's going to work best with on-field stunners. I think Lighter and Lycon are going to be his best stunners. Not only are they going to be able to take up a good amount of on-field time so that Hugo can just sweep in and get the Totalize effect off, but these two also do have buffs for ice damage in their kit. So you are going to be able to deal some extra damage as well and have a little bit of support there, even if you're just running one of them. Now, the one unfortunate thing for Hugo and really any ice character right now and for a while now is that you are competing in the same element with Miyabi. But if you're someone who isn't really using anomaly characters, I think Hugo could be really good, especially since Ellen has, I wouldn't say she's like completely fallen off, but she definitely is not as good as she once was. So Hugo could be a nice upgrade or benefit if you are someone who's looking for a stronger ice character and maybe you don't have Miyabi or you just want another ice character on your account for DPS. So overall, I think the main accounts that would benefit the most from pulling for Hugo are people who need more DPS characters or want more attack specialty characters, because I know we've gotten a ton of anomaly characters and I get some people are probably tired of anomaly. So seeing an attack character like Hugo is a breath of fresh air. So I think that could definitely be good for players like that to pull for him. And also if you somehow don't have any ice coverage on your account for DPSs, like if you don't have Miyabi, if you don't have Ellen or you don't want to use Ellen, I think Hugo could be pretty solid. Miyabi will probably have a rerun, I would assume, within probably the next few patches. So that could also be something to look out for. But I do also think that if you're someone who does not have either Lighter or Lycon, it can even just be one of them, you don't need to run both. But if you don't even have one of them, I think Hugo's not going to be as good, because not only are you going to miss out on that stun effect if you're not running him with the stunners, but also those two are by far going to be his best stunners since they take up a lot of on-field time, and you're going to be able to get extra buffs on them for Hugo as well. And I also think that if you have enough DPS characters on your account and you're kind of chilling, you're able to clear content, Hugo's not a must for you, but if you really like him, then I think he's going to be a great overall pull. So that is what I think of Hugo. I'd love to hear what you all think down in the comments below. But thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed and want to see more content from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But with that, everyone, I will see you all next time.